This is the story of a catastrophic miscalculation disguised as a public relations victory. What looked like a simple, celebratory release of anniversary photographs was actually the precise moment the final illusion of independence shattered. In the quiet corridors of the British monarchy, a devastating new nickname has been coined by palace staff for the Duke of Sussex, an undeniable marker of how far the narrative has fallen, Hijack Harry. The title was born from a pattern of behavior so transparent and so aggressively timed that it exposed the central contradiction of the post-royal Sussex brand by deliberately releasing their own highly curated media drops at the exact moment King Charles or other senior royals embark on major public engagements. They did not prove their independent global power. Instead, they revealed a terrifying commercial desperation, proving to the world that they are completely incapable of generating their own cultural gravity without siphoning it directly from the institution they abandoned. In this video, we are going to unpack the terrifying psychological and commercial reality behind this new strategic pivot. We will examine the precise timeline of the so-called hijack strategy and what it reveals about the staggering financial pressures threatening the California estate. We will look at how a quest for absolute global independence unraveled into a parasitic public relations model, where relevance is entirely dependent on the schedules of the working royal family. More importantly, we will dissect the subtle, deeply troubling emotional signals that suggest a definitive moral collapse. We will explore how the very institution they claimed was toxic and suffocating has now become the only lifeline keeping their commercial enterprise afloat. By the end, you will understand exactly why this relentless shadow game is no longer a story about a couple thriving in exile, but a desperate scramble to commodify the fading echoes of their royal past. To truly comprehend the gravity of this strategic downgrade, we must first remember the staggering height from which this empire was launched. Cast your mind back to the intoxicating era of their initial departure. They did not just step back from the British royal family, they were positioned to conquer the modern world. They were armed with immense global goodwill backed by $100 million production deals, and celebrated as the ultimate modernizers who had outgrown an archaic system. They had the ear of Hollywood titans, the absolute attention of the global media, and a level of historical relevance that suggested they were building a billion-dollar philanthropic and entertainment juggernaut. It was an era defined by the promise of limitless, untethered potential. The public was entirely captivated, ready to champion a new, ethically superior kind of celebrity, to look at that pinnacle of undeniable power and compare it to the current reality of carefully timing an Instagram post. To disrupt a ribbon-cutting ceremony in Northern Ireland is to witness a breathtaking masterclass in self-sabotage. The billionaire public relations machinery has entirely given way to the cold, undeniable reality of a fading cultural footprint. The fracture did not begin with a single mistake, but with a slow, agonizing realization that the American commercial landscape is utterly unforgiving. The brutal truth of the entertainment industry is that it requires more than a royal title and a victimhood narrative to sustain a permanent audience. As major streaming contracts stalled and the initial shock value of their royal grievances evaporated, a terrifying financial reality began to set in. Behind the pristine walls of Montecito, the annual burn rate for private security details, elite international publicists, and the maintenance of a lifestyle built for billionaires is staggering. The realization was cold and sharp without the institutional weight and the infinite oxygen of the British royal family. Their personal brand lacked the fundamental substance to command the global market. The global audience was not interested in their podcasts or their attempts at high-level statecraft unless it was directly tethered to the drama of the House of Windsor. Cornered by commercial failure and a rapidly dwindling cultural relevance, a new and deeply unsettling strategy began to emerge. In the world of high-stakes celebrity PR, nothing is an accident, and the timing of a media release is a highly weaponized tool. The pattern became impossible to ignore. When King Charles and Queen Camilla embarked on a deeply significant, highly publicized 3-day tour of Northern Ireland, the media landscape was suddenly interrupted by the release of unseen, highly polished anniversary photographs from the Sussex camp. When Catherine, the Princess of Wales, undertook a high-stakes solo diplomatic trip, a carefully worded op-ed or a surprise video appearance would miraculously materialize from California on the exact same morning. These were not coincidences. This was the deliberate deployment of the hijack strategy. It was a calculated attempt to intercept the global algorithmic traffic that naturally surrounds the working royals, redirecting that massive wave of attention toward their own stalling commercial ventures. But public events have a ruthless way of exposing the truth, and this strategy carries a devastating psychological admission. You do not shadow the crown if you have built an empire of your own. By tying their public output directly to the royal calendar, they inadvertently confess that their independent brand is functionally dead. True power does not need to look at someone else's schedule to decide when to speak. True global icons do not need to piggyback on the diplomatic labor of their estranged relatives to guarantee a headline. The performance of importance had become vastly larger than the public interest itself. It stopped looking like a defense mechanism or a display of competitive strength, and started looking like a deeply embarrassing display of vanity and structural weakness. It was a fabricated spectacle meant to convince the world and perhaps themselves that they still belonged on the same stage as the reigning monarch. The ethical collapse of this strategy is glaring and devastating. For years, the core manifesto of their entire departure from the royal family was rooted in escaping the relentless, toxic media machine that dictated their lives. They demanded peace. They demanded to be judged on their own merits, separate from the golden cage of the institution. Yet they have now voluntarily chained themselves back to that exact same machine, using the working royals as a metronome to keep their own relevance alive. This parasitic public relations model tells the world that independence was never the ultimate goal. The goal was to retain the immense privilege and visibility of the monarchy without shouldering any of the duty or the grueling public service that justifies its existence. It is a staggering moral contradiction to publicly condemn an institution as fundamentally broken, while simultaneously using its majestic clockwork-like public duties as the sole marketing vehicle for your lifestyle brand. This profound ethical pivot is being watched closely not just by a disillusioned public, but across the Atlantic behind the closed doors of the institution they are desperately trying to manipulate. The coinage of the nickname Hijack Harry by palace insiders is not merely a piece of petty gossip, it is a clinical, unyielding assessment of a fallen adversary. In the early days of the Sussex departure, there was a public expectation of a bitter, ongoing war of words, but the palace chose a different weapon, absolute unyielding restraint mixed with a devastating refusal to acknowledge the provocations. The royal family operates on a timeline of centuries, while the Montecito PR team operates on a timeline of 24-hour news cycles. The institution recognized the inherent danger of a personality that demanded absolute focus and rejected the established hierarchy. By refusing to engage in the chaotic emotional theater of these timed media drops, the palace protected the crown from being dragged into a bargain basement reality television narrative. And what of Prince Harry in the quiet, isolated corners of this strategic failure? The psychological toll of this descent must be profound. He traded the unparalleled institutional support, the military honors, and the genuine global respect of his birthright for a life entirely dependent on his wife's commercial instincts and a desperate need to constantly remind the world that he exists. The man who once commanded the Invictus Games stage with undeniable gravitas is now reduced to a punchline among the very staff who used to revere him. He has become the ultimate collateral damage in a quest for Hollywood domination that never materialized. The tragedy of Prince Harry is that he believed he was breaking free to find his authentic voice, only to realize he had surrendered his entire identity to become a disruptive shadow, permanently tethered to the family he claims to have outgrown. As the hijack strategy becomes more obvious and the public fatigue deepens, a terrifying realization is beginning to dawn on the California estate. The repeated attempts to upstage the king have not elevated their brand. It has only highlighted the massive, unbridgeable chasm between genuine royal duty and desperate celebrity hustle. But the palace is no longer just watching in silent disapproval. Behind the thick walls of Buckingham Palace, a final, definitive strategy has been quietly authorized. The institution has realized that silence is no longer enough to protect the dignity of the crown from this endless parasitic campaign. A brutal, unprecedented line is about to be drawn, a masterstroke of institutional retaliation that will permanently cut off the very oxygen the Sussex Empire is trying to steal. The game of shadows is over, and the consequences of their final miscalculation are about to be unleashed. The retaliation from the palace was not a loud public declaration or a dramatic media war, but a quiet, bureaucratic eviction from the royal narrative. The institution has shifted from passive avoidance to active clinical erasure. Every official bridge, every lingering diplomatic channel, and every implicit validation is being methodically severed. When the palace recently updated its official digital architecture, stripping away residual honorifics and consolidating the Sussex presence into a minor footnote at the bottom of the page, it was not an administrative oversight. It was a clear, calculated message to global corporate partners. The palace has recognized that the only way to defeat a parasitic public relations strategy is to completely eliminate the host by rendering their counter-programming entirely irrelevant to the official succession of the crown. The institution has effectively built an impenetrable firewall around the future king and queen, leaving the exiled couple to shout into an increasingly empty room. This total institutional lockdown has sent shockwaves through the quiet enclave of Montecito, exposing a profound internal rift within the Sussex marriage itself. For years, the shared narrative of surviving a toxic system held them together, providing a common enemy and a unified purpose. But when the enemy stops fighting back and simply locks the gates, the conflict inevitably turns inward. Sources close to the couple suggest that the psychological weight of this absolute estrangement is falling unevenly, causing intense strain behind closed doors. Prince Harry, a man whose entire identity was anchored in the absolute permanence of his birthright and his military brotherhood, is forced to confront the terrifying reality of being completely erased from his family's history. The therapy and emotional support systems that once focused on healing past childhood traumas are now reportedly being consumed by the immediate, exhausting anxiety of a fading future and a rapidly dissolving legacy. While the public observes the outward manifestations of this crisis through increasingly frantic media drops, the private reality is one of profound strategic uncertainty. The initial promise of their historic exit was absolute freedom, a life where they would control the narrative and dictate their own terms to the global media. Instead, they find themselves caught in a desperate reactive loop, entirely dependent on the very institution they claimed to have outgrown. Every public appearance by the working royals now requires a calculated countermove from California, transforming their daily life into an exhausting game of chess where they are always playing with the black pieces. The luxury estate, once envisioned as a sanctuary of independent global power, increasingly resembles a golden echo chamber where the only activity is the frantic brainstorming of a public relations team running out of options to justify their massive overhead. The subtle shifts in their public output over the past months betray the grim reality of this strategic stasis. We are witnessing the gradual, painful downgrade from high-level global statecraft to everyday influencer economics. The grand philanthropic declarations and high-minded production deals that defined their early American era have quietly vanished, replaced by the mundane realities of digital marketing, lifestyle product placements, and commercial hustling. When your primary mechanism for staying relevant shifts from delivering keynote addresses on the global stage to trying to orchestrate an algorithmic distraction during a royal tour, the illusion of supreme importance dissolves entirely. The public notices these shifts not as separate, isolated events, but as a continuous pattern of commercial desperation, exposing the truth that without the majestic backdrop of the British monarchy, the personal brand lacks the inherent gravity to sustain a global audience. This is precisely why this narrative continues to captivate a global audience far beyond the confines of traditional royal gossip. It stands as a profound real-time study in human hubris and the dangerous allure of digital projection. The story of the Sussex downfall resonates because it mirrors the broader anxieties of our modern culture, serving as a textbook example of the toxic belief that visibility is synonymous with value, and that an engineered public image can replace the slow, quiet work of duty, loyalty, and service. Meghan Markle believed that the global deference, the roaring crowds, and the institutional adoration she experienced as a working royal belonged to her inherently, rather than to the thousand-year-old crown she was temporarily permitted to represent. The slow, public unraveling of that delusion serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the true cost of weaponizing personal grievances and burning the very bridges that provide genuine human security. As we look toward the horizon, the trajectory for the House of Montecito appears coldly inevitable, constrained by the diminishing returns of a narrative that has been told too many times. The strategy of shifting from royal exile to commercial entity has reached its structural limits, leaving them with fewer assets to trade in the attention economy. Without a fundamental shift in strategy, a willingness to step away from the mirror and abandon the relentless pursuit of upstaging the crown, they are destined to remain trapped in this self-destructive cycle of visual humiliation The global audience will continue to watch not out of active malice, but because the human drama of a self-inflicted fall from grace is universally compelling. The ultimate tragedy of the Hijack Harry crisis is the realization that, in trying to conquer the world on their own terms, they have managed to alienate the only institution that could ever truly protect their identity and validate their place in history. Thank you for watching this analytical breakdown into the shifting dynamics of modern power media strategy and public relations. If you appreciate commentary that bypasses the tabloid noise to examine the psychological and structural realities behind the headlines, please consider subscribing to the channel. Turn on your notifications so you never miss an unvarnished look at the stories defining our cultural landscape. Share your perspective on this evolving global narrative in the comments below, and we will see you in the next analysis.